Shalom, everybody. Akiva Gersh here. So excited to be talking Aliyah with Ari Harow. Ari Harow was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, moved with his family to Israel in 1985 at the age of 12. Following his schooling, he served in the Golani Brigade, an infantry unit in the IDF. He holds a degree in psychology from the City University of New York and an MA in political science from Tel Aviv University. In 2007, Harow was appointed as Foreign Affairs Advisor to Likud Party Chairman Benjamin Netanyahu, and was appointed as Netanyahu's bureau chief in 2008, controlling the prime minister's schedule. In 2010, he founded an international government relations firm based in Israel, and in 2014, returned to Prime Minister Netanyahu's office after being appointed chief of staff. He left the position in January 2015, and since then has worked as an international business and political advisor. Thank you, Ari, so much for your time this morning. So excited to talk.
My pleasure. It's good to see you, Akiva.
Good to see you. So Aliyah is obviously it's a big deal. It's a big topic, especially right now, which we'll get to a little bit later with the rise in interest from American Jews in Aliyah. But for you specifically, for you personally, you know, I think it's so important for new Olim to hear personal stories, for people thinking about Aliyah, to hear people's personal stories. It gives them a sense of like, what is it like on the other side? What is it like when you actually make Aliyah? And I think it helps them to better prepare for their own personal experience. So let's start off with you and your personal experience. You know, you made Aliyah as a child, basically, as like almost teenager, young teenager, 12 years old. Right. What was it like for you specifically to make Aliyah at that age? But I'll even ask you a question before that. And that is, what was your family's motivation to making Aliyah, and were you conscious of that motivation?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a number of different stages to this. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be here and to talk about Aliyah. Aliyah, for me personally, is a very important issue. It's an integral issue to the future of the Jewish people in Israel, in my belief, and so it's a pleasure to talk with you about this. I was born into a very active Zionist family in Los Angeles. It started with my grandparents, who were one of the founders of the Orthodox community in Los Angeles, very involved in creating the first Jewish elementary school and Orthodox synagogue, and were very involved in many, many different Jewish activities and in Zionist activities. When the Zionist leaders came through Los Angeles back in those days, in the 40s and the 50s, many times they were housed at my grandparents and spoke in their living room, you know, to whatever crowds could be brought together. My parents met in, excuse me. My parents met in Camp Mosheva, which is, Bnei Akiva's summer camp in California, way back when. So there's a very strong Zionist atmosphere in the house that I was born into. So even as a child, it was something, living in Los Angeles, it was something that was always discussed. There was always a feeling that at some point we would move to Israel. And even before we moved, my parents actually, in addition to the regular trips that we made to visit Israel, sent me to summer camp in Israel for a number of summers. Me and my brother were alone, 10, 11-year-old boys getting on a plane from Los Angeles. And back then there was no direct flights. So we had to fly, you know, literally around the world on our own to get to Israel for the summer. And it was some of the greatest experiences that we've had. So yes, we were very much attached to Israel before we actually made Aliyah. So that, I guess that answers that part of the question.
Right. So in terms of the second part, you know, for you making Aliyah at 12 years old, you know, parents who make Aliyah, like, you know my wife Tamar, and we made Aliyah before we had kids. So that's another different experience of making Aliyah. When you make Aliyah with kids, though we don't know it personally, if you're hearing about it from other people, it's obviously a very different experience. And making Aliyah as a kid is a different experience. So you were 12 years old when you made Aliyah. That's kind of like, you know, you're just becoming a teenager, you know, you got your life, you know, pretty much set up in America already, and then boom, your parents
Yeah.
take you, and even though you had this incredible and beautiful Zionist Jewish upbringing in America, and it still was like this uprooting and bringing you over into this new world. So what was that like for you personally?
No question. It was definitely a shock to the system. You know, there's one thing, you know, it's one thing to intellectually know that, okay, we're going to move there. And it's another thing to suddenly be, you know, torn away from your friends and your, you know, and sports and everything that you're familiar with and your home. And my parents, we made Aliyah and went right to an absorption center in Ra'anana. And we had lived in Beverly Hills, California, you know, had a nice swimming pool in the backyard and lived a very nice life. And the next thing we know, we're in like, you know, 2x2 apartment in an absorption center.
Wow.
As a 12-year-old kid, it wasn't, you know, that horrific, but it's definitely a shock to the system. And when you throw in, you know, the cultural change, the language, new schooling, it was definitely a very difficult first year. At the age of 12, you know, as you said, I was pretty much set with my friends. We were in, you know, bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah season already there. And suddenly I'm in a completely new place, new school, trying to make new friends in a new language. It's not an easy transition.
Right, for sure. So, you know, when I think about that, and again, when I think about parents making Aliyah with their children, you know, it's really like this mix of like incredible excitement, like we're doing the greatest thing ever. You know, this like the best decision ever. You know, we're making Aliyah. We're like joining like the Jewish people back in the Jewish homeland. It's like, you know, it's powerful and an emotional step in one's life. And of course, again, when you're making Aliyah with children, you're just like, I hope it works for them. Like, I hope it goes okay with them.
Right.
I hope I don't mess up their lives and all these kinds of other worries that, again, I haven't experienced, but I've heard from many other people who have made Aliyah with their children. So kind of along those lines, wanting to ask you, was there like a moment for you, for your parents, for your family, where, I don't know, like you guys kind of realized like it was a great decision, it worked, like, you know, even if it was maybe even articulated around the dinner table one night or something like that?
Yeah, I think that, I think for us, I don't know if it was a moment. I think that there were different stages for, you know, different parts of our family. I mean, besides myself, my parents have 7 children. I'm one of 7.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, there's, you know, a range of stages that we were at. So I think each one of us had their moments. I'll tell you, my younger, 2 of my younger brothers, twin brothers, who at the time, I guess, were about 5 years old when we made Aliyah, they would walk to Gan by themselves from the Merkaz Klita, from the absorption center. It was, you know, whatever, a block and a half or 2 blocks, but, you know, the thought of a 5-year-old in Los Angeles walking to school on their own, and one of my brothers particularly, one of the twins, was, you know, very connected to nature, still is, and he would take his time and he would, you know, glance at the trees and sing with the birds, and you know, for him, I think my parents seeing that was like, wow, you know, this is just incredible. I think for myself as a 12-year-old, it probably took about a year. 6 months after we moved into Merkaz Klita, into the absorption center, we moved into our home in Neve Eliza, Karnei Shomron, and slowly but surely, as that home became my home, and, you know, and we made local friends, and I became more comfortable with the new surroundings, it started feeling like home, and it was fantastic. It was a great childhood there. I was very happy. But I think, you know, to answer your question, I think any type of transition anywhere, you know, comes with its, you know, with its challenges and its pains. But I think that persevering, you know, there's nothing more wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. You know, continuing along this line, as you lived here more, as you got older, you know, into your, you know, older teenager years, into high school, you know, even before the army, let's say, were there things that happened, things that you did, or just moments that you had that you felt like, okay, you know, I'm acclimating, you know, because when I talk about making Aliyah, oftentimes people think I'm talking about just like the moment, like you arrive, like that half a day that you arrive in the airport and you know, cheer, and then you go to your first residence. But for me, it's like the whole process. It's like the whole years and years of not just making Aliyah technically and logistically, but this whole unfolding story of acclimating to life in Israel, becoming more accustomed here, becoming more Israeli, and all of
Right.
that. So for you, do you like, were there moments where you, as you got older again in your teenage years, that you feel like, okay, like this is working, I'm becoming more Israeli, and even things that maybe helped you to feel like you're acclimating more to life in Israel?
Yes, I mean, I guess I'll talk about my teenage years, but obviously the army was a turning point, and I'll get to that. But the teenage years, I mean, I was living in the Shomron in the midst of the first Intifada. There was tremendous amount of I guess violence, political activism. It was sort of like we were living in the center of, well, what felt like the center of the world, right? The demonstrations for and against that were taking place throughout the country, and we were living it. So, that in and of itself was a tremendous change coming from Los Angeles, where really all I cared about were the Lakers and the Dodgers. And suddenly,
that was the contrast.
Right, well,
those
yeah,
teams
different
and their,
sports.
yeah,
Right,
exactly.
But coming here and suddenly finding yourself as a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid, and recognizing that you're in the middle of, and you're living out Israel's, or the Jewish people's future, was definitely one of those moments. We were very active. I mean, even as children, we would take buses down to Tel Aviv to participate in demonstrations. We would, we were active on many fronts. Politically, we recognized what was happening, which is, something interesting I see today with my children, that, for a child that age to be so aware of what's happening in those worlds, coming from Los Angeles was not something I was really exposed to. So I think that was one of those moments where suddenly you felt like, okay, I'm part of something else over here. High school was fantastic. I think growing up in the Shomron, where the communities are relatively small, allowed me to integrate much easier. But the real melting pot, where I finally said, okay, I am Israeli, was when I entered the army.
Amazing. Maybe, do you want to speak about that a little bit, just to see, like,
Sure.
what was it about your army experience that helped you to feel that way?
Yeah, I think that the army is a fascinating and experience. Any way you look at it, it's something I highly recommend, even for Americans that are thinking of coming over here. I was talking to my stepdaughter the other day about, just put it on your radar. It's something that you may want to think about. But I do. The army is the great melting pot of the state of Israel. It's the first time where many Israelis get to meet an American wearing a kippah, a Moroccan from Netivot, an Ethiopian from wherever, people from the north, people from the south, rich, poor, different types of religious backgrounds, people from countries all over the world, and in one fell swoop, you're one, and you have to act as one. On the, doing military exercises, serving wherever it is you serve. I was in Lebanon. I was in, some of the Palestinian towns, and very quickly you realize and recognize that Israel is not one type of person, and it's not one type of, and there's not one story. And just being a part of that puzzle allows you to feel like, okay, I belong here.
Amazing. Kind of going back to the theme of children, but in a different kind of way. You came as a child, as a teenager. Your parents made the decision for you to make Aliyah. You grow up here, you go to the army, you create a life for yourself, you have your own children. what was it like for you? And what is it like, for you, like raising your own children here in Israel? They're born here. You made Aliyah as a child. Are there certain things that you think about, as you're raising your own children here in the land that like come up for you?
For sure, for sure. There's, well, I'd say that there's a number of different things. Number one, there is a unique Zionism to an Ole. Someone who's making Aliyah has a unique Zionism, because it's something that, in essence, you had to earn. You weren't born into. And I think that there's a passion that comes with that I'm sure, I know that you have, Akiva, and I'm sure, you're familiar with your friends who've made Aliyah. And, it's been important for me to try and convey that passion to my children, even though they were born here. And it's, this is their first home, not their second home. Mm-hmm. And so that's one element that, from day one, I've made it a priority to try and instill that passion and love for the state of Israel, the land of Israel, to my kids. Then there's that, the other side, which is, you have to speak English. You have to speak English. When I hear them speaking to each other in Hebrew, I mean, obviously they speak fluent English, but it's not, it's not their mother. Well, I guess it is their mother tongue, but it's not their preferred tongue. Let's put it that way. And it obviously is a skill that I feel is very important, and hammering that home is one of the challenges with the kids. But yeah, I think that it definitely is interesting looking at your children who have grown up here and comparing it to the upbringing that an Ole has.
Right, 100%. I mean, this is something I think about a lot. And, again, looking at my own kids, and I mean, I would just say, there's a million things to say about it, but I'll just say one thing, our oldest, who's 13, it's funny that you say that thing about the English and the language, because as they've gotten older, I mean, they grew up with English. English was their first language, right? What they learned in the house, but then obviously they learned Hebrew from the world, from school, from their friends, and I mean, almost all their friends, if not all their friends, only speak Hebrew. So it's just interesting to see them switching back and forth. I sometimes pick up my daughter from school. She jumps in the car and we start talking English. I'm like, and now you go back to English. She's like, that's so weird. Why do that? It makes like this mental switch. Sometimes it actually takes you a few moments. She'll just like, spitting out all these sentences in Hebrew, which is fine. I love it. But it's, until she's like, all right, I can go into English now. But even like when the cousins, our kids have a lot of cousins who their parents also made Aliyah, but the cousins were born here. And as they've been getting older together and speaking Hebrew with one another, just like these little moments, just like, wow, like our kids are becoming, I mean, they are Israeli, obviously they're born here, but yeah, I don't know, maybe more Israeli, if that makes any sense. I'm not really sure. For sure. But even as, I see like our oldest, he's 13, just like this year, like starting to like bike ride to the Mayan, to the natural spring with his friends, and like sit down and make a coffee together, and like, it's like, instead of going to like a pool, they go to like the Mayan. It's just like, oh, right. Like, for me, like those moments make me feel like, okay, it's happening.
It's true. I mean, my my oldest, who's 16, I think at 14, if I'm not mistaken, was the first time her and her friends went on a 3-day camp out on the Kinneret by themselves. And when people in the U.S. hear that they think we're crazy, but no, in Israel, the few friends, they jump on a bus, they camp out, they cook for themselves, they swim. It's it's definitely a different lifestyle, and that's definitely a very Israeli thing that I don't know if my parents would have let me, done that at 14.
Exactly. That's funny that you say that, because again, my son who's 13, he wants to do that already this summer.
Right.
And we know that it's not just one bus, it's like usually like 3 buses.
Right.
And it's take like 3 hours to get there, and they're hopefully gonna get off at the right place. And 100%, he's like bugging us. I'm like, you're 13 years old, wait till you're 15 or 16. But he's like, no, my friends, my cousins already,
Right.
So it's those moments where we as like, American born have to realize it's a different world, it's a different culture, and our kids definitely help us to understand that. Maybe a couple more questions.
Sure.
You've had, it's interesting. I know a bit about you and your life and your journey here and your incredible work. You worked in the government, which is unique and amazing in and of itself. Would you say, you know, when we think about Aliyah, when we think about Americans making Aliyah, you know, having lived here in Israel for so long, obviously the majority of your life already, but also having had, time in the army, you know, time in the government, you know, really like really deep in Israeli society, obviously. Do you feel like Israelis in general, either in like the, you know, the civilian sector or in the governmental sector, when they hear about Americans making Aliyah, you know, when they meet an American that made Aliyah, do you feel like they're either like, yeah, kol hakavod, way to go, you're awesome, you know, or they're like indifferent, like, okay, or they're just like, well, why would you make Aliyah and like leave America? You know, do you have like a sense of like, how it's, obviously there's many different opinions, but like, is there like a majority sense that you feel from Israelis?
Yeah, you know what? I'll tell you. I think that, like you said, there's definitely, you know, there's no unified view on anything in this country, right? So everybody has their own opinion. You're going to hear a little bit of each of, you know, the attitudes that you just touched on. But I think that you know, overall, especially when you look at American Jewry. You know, I'll give you an example. If you look at the support the Israeli public has shown towards any U.S. president, go back, you know, the last, whatever, 25 years, be it, you know, Clinton, George W., Obama in the beginning, and then, you know, Trump, the instinctive response of Israelis are, we love America, we support America. So because of that, I think generally speaking, people, you know, are very touched and are thrilled to have Americans coming over here. You know, it's hard for many Americans after they make Aliyah to learn Hebrew, because everybody wants to talk to them in English, right? You go anywhere, the second they sense your accent, they'll switch over to English, and they tell you about the time that they, you know, they lived in Miami or in New York, or they traveled here, or they have a cousin there. And there's, you know, they're looking for that commonality that they can share with you. So whether or not they think you're crazy for moving here, or they applaud you for moving here, I think ultimately there is a, you know, there's a connection that most Israelis feel right off the bat, which is unique, I think, to the United States and Olim coming from the United States.
Mm-hmm. Great. It's funny that you say that about the English, because, you know, we've been here for 16 years now, and I came with zero Hebrew. Like, I didn't have a Jewish day school background, which on one level hindered me, but it also helped me, because I didn't have all that kind of expectation of I have to sound a certain way. So I was very uninhibited, and I felt free to make whatever mistake in the world, and that actually helped me, I think, to move a bit quicker maybe than I would have. But still, and I'm not 100% fluent even today, but I feel very comfortable, and I can have a conversation with Israelis and feel totally, again, comfortable. But just last night, literally, we went out for dinner for my wife's birthday, and we walked into the restaurant, and like I asked, you know, to be seated. And of course, you know, like, though I've worked on my accent, it's obviously never going to go away. And they can sense my American accent. And the woman spoke back to me in English. And my kids, who were right next to me, they were like, you know, because they've seen me before. Like, I take it very personally, you know, like, don't talk to me in English. But you sense the accent, don't talk to me in English, you know. I'm speaking Hebrew, you speak in Hebrew. You know, my kids are like all scared. Oh no, what's am I going to do? You know, I'm like, whatever. It's a funny, it's like a funny and unique thing that Olim will probably always deal with, you know, no matter how long they're here, whether it's 5 years, 25 years, or 45 years, you know.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. But you know what, like you said, and I don't think it's unique to Israel. There is, you know, there is a generational process when you move to any country. I mean, take any of the immigrants, you know, at the turn of the last century that moved to the United States. You know, they were, you know, the initial stepping stone. Their children were more acclimated, and the grandchildren were already, you know, completely Americans. And right, exactly. And I think that, you know, it's natural. You see this, by the way, here in Israel with other aliyahs that took place, you know, in the 40s and the 50s, many from former Arab countries. where the initial generation still, lingered, but by the second generation, they were more Israelis, and by the third generation, it's completely, yeah.
Right. I think maybe the Americans like to talk about it so much.
Right. That's for sure.
We write books about it. We have interviews about it. We have Facebook groups about it. Well,
I think that there's something beautiful in it. I was actually, I'm in the process of writing a piece, because, well, I don't know if we have time for a quick, just a quick thought that I.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. No. So this, this is something that I heard many years ago, and you'll read about it, another time. But something that I learned many years ago from Rabbi Yonah Fold, Ari Fold, Zichrono Livracha's father, who I worked with for many years, and someone who I love dearly, and was sort of a mentor in many ways. And he talked about, there's a sentence in Birkat Hamazon, in Grace After Meals, that says, that he will return us to our land upright. And Rabbi Fold said, why do you need the word upright? He'll return us to our land. What does upright mean? And the idea was that many times, and we've seen it, over the last 100 years, how Jews have returned to Israel not upright, right? They're running away from the Holocaust and pogroms and anarchy and anti-Semitism and financial distress, etc. And there's something special and unique, and that's why we pray for it, to be able to come back to Israel standing tall, because we want to be here. And I definitely think that American Jewry, has had that opportunity. How long they'll have it for, remains to be seen. And it's definitely, something that is being discussed today. Things are a little bit more shaken than they were, 6 months ago or 2 years ago. But I definitely think that plays into everything that we've talked about. The fact that, we, yourself, myself, my parents, came to Israel, upright, embracing everything that this country, has. So it's a unique position that Americans, I think, we should be grateful to have had that opportunity.
100%. Beautiful words and a beautiful thought. I'm so glad you shared that, actually, because it's a perfect segue to the last question that I want to ask you.
Sure.
And that is connected to the fact that, right, when you look historically, almost every single Aliyah of Jews from any region, country in the world has been a push. It's been a push out of a place because the Jews had to leave. It was no longer safe for the Jews to be there, or just went over that tipping point. And American Aliyah is very unique in that sense, is that it's not a pushing out. It's a pull towards. America is a great place to live, but I just feel so drawn towards living in Israel. And obviously now, literally this year, in these past few months with Corona and with I don't know what to call it even, but just obviously the issues of race and anti-Semitism, happening in America in an even more powerful way. It's bringing Aliyah to the minds of many more Jews in numbers that we've never seen since the beginning of the state.
Right.
So connected to that, I want to share a quick little vignette that I've heard about Ben Gurion. I'm not 100% sure it's true, but I've heard it from many different people who I trust. And the story goes like this, that Ben Gurion, at the beginning of the War of Independence, Golda Meir was sent to America to tour around America, talking to different Jewish communities to raise, desperately needed money. And she, being this incredible speaker, she came with the story goes, she came with a bag and $10 in her pocket. She left with $50 million in donations from American Jewry. And she said along the way, she never wrote a speech. She always said, whether we fight the war is not up to you. We have to fight the war. That's already been decided for us. Whether we win the war, that might be up to you, she said to American Jewry. So after the war, we know we win the war. We have a state. It's unbelievable. And Ben Gurion goes back to America, and American Jewry thinks, he's coming here to thank us for all of our help. We helped them win the war. They have to thank us. And the story goes that Ben Gurion didn't do that. And we can imagine Ben Gurion not doing that. He says instead, to all these crowds of people that he speaks to, he says, yeah, I knew we created this state. It's born. We're back after 2,000 years in our ancestral homeland. When are you joining us? And that's what he says to American Jewry. So kind of like with that idea in mind, you know, Ben-Gurion had a very big expectation that American Jews would make Aliyah, or at least a very strong desire that they would. You know, kind of taking that thought and superimposing it onto what's happening today. Just maybe some of your final thoughts about, you know, American Jewish Aliyah, specifically today, for those thinking about Aliyah, what would you say to them? Kind of like putting that all together in our final question.
I love the story. Yeah, you know, I was on 3 phone calls yesterday with very prominent U.S. Jews who have started, you know, filing the paperwork for Aliyah. They're in, you know, nefesh b'nefesh. We downloaded the documents.
Wow.
When I say I'm talking about very prominent, wealthy, affluent people who, you know, can weather whatever storm is going on there. But there definitely is a sense that, you know what, we should be looking at this a little bit more seriously now. Yeah, as we've said earlier, I believe Aliyah is something that is necessary for us here in the Jewish state. I think that living out the dream, living out the ideology is fantastic, and the more people that do that, the better. I hope and pray that we don't get to the point where the U.S. Has to make that hard choice rather than an easy choice. But times have started to change. There was a fantastic piece that Rabbi Beryl Wine wrote last week. He's a renowned historian, and his piece was not a religious piece; it was a historical piece. And he said, and this is his words, you know, he said, "I got it wrong. I thought that the United States was going to be the exception to the rule. The rule being every empire eventually fades, every empire eventually dies out." And he goes into further detail, but I think that we're definitely seeing a shift within the United States. Whatever your political beliefs, whatever your religious beliefs, there's no question that there's a rise of anti-Semitism. The debate that's taking place today around the comments of, you know, some celebrities and athletes is in and of itself a scary reality, where it's not just condemned and there's no mass demonstrations and politicians are not going crazy about this. It's sort of like, well, you know, is it acceptable to be anti-Semitic? And while there's people speaking out against it, there's also people speaking out in favor of it, and people who have, you know, very large followings. So I think that, you know, those who, you know, ezu chacham haroeh hanolad, you know, somebody who can foresee where things are headed and take that step now will be blessed. I think that we here in Israel will be waiting for you with open arms. I think that, you know, the contribution that the Americans in Israel have made to the Jewish state is tremendous and grows by the day. And I agree with what you said. I think that the more American Jews that we can bring home now, tomorrow, in the near future, the better off we are, and the better off I ultimately believe they will be as well.
I want to say a big amen to that. I totally agree, and that's really beautiful. I think it's important for people to hear those words you just shared, for American Jews specifically, and specifically American Jews who are now thinking about Aliyah. And we are living in very, very unique times. All right, I want to thank you so much for this conversation.
My pleasure.
Inspiring and important, and continued success in all the important work that you're doing for the Jewish people and here in Israel. So all the best.
Thanks, Akiva.
So much.
Good seeing you. Take care.
Bye-bye.